Hello everyone, this video is going to be a bit different because instead of explaining the game mechanics, I'm basically going to give you a set of tips and advice about what to do when your country suddenly gets invaded, probably by a much bigger and stronger nation. So first of all, way before any wars before even starts, you need to look at your nation and think about how to defend it. And of course the most important thing is to prepare defensive positions, which is forts. Forts are great, they give you defensive battles in defendable terrain, they're the best. But you need to set them up before the war to be able to use their full potential. So first of all, you need to place them in the best terrain. So the way to do it is use the simple terrain map mode and pick the provinces. Of course, the mountains are the best. Rough terrain like hills and highlands are second best because they give you -1, mountains -2. Rivers, as you can see here, are still kind of useful because they as well can provide -1. So as an example, let's look at the setup of Ottomans in forts at the beginning of the game. So for example, this fort over here, it's built in farmlands, so that's actually not really useful, and this fort is not really protecting anything, as you can see. It's restricting access to those 4 provinces, but it's not defending Greece. The enemy can still just walk past the fort. It's not defending the straits over here. It's not even defending that much provinces overall, because all of the Balkans to the north can be easily occupied. So we could, for example, at the beginning of the game, destroy this fort and build another one in here on the mountains, so we get a great defensive bonus, and a fort over here would restrict access to all of those provinces, which would make going to Greece around it impossible and protect our southern flank over here once we conquer all the Greek minors. So that would be one thing. And another, ideally we would want to protect all of those 3 provinces over here. It's not necessary, you don't have to protect all of your provinces, every single one of them, because it's not really worth it. But every province you lose income, you lose manpower, you lose possible loans. So you ideally want to be able to protect as much as possible. So let's look again. There's not really any forts right now that protect it. The capital fort is not giving you zone of control, so it's not really worth much. And I guess the best province to put would be in Philippe, which is woods, which is -1, fine. The rivers are not ideal because enemy could still just go through those 2 and go around them, but still -1 is way better than just grasslands. Plus it's giving you safe access from your Asia Minor provinces to Greece, because if we had a fort over here as well, those 2 provinces would be restricted access, so you could just go along the coast and easily be able to defend both forts. In here you also get a safe enemy cannot go along the Black Sea because of this province. So those 2 forts would protect basically all of your Balkan provinces except a few in the north. But as I said, we do not really need to defend all of them anyways, because it's not really worth it. Just because this fort here, it will also give us zone of control over all of those provinces, which means to be able to reliably control them, your enemy would have to control the fort as well. Another thing is for Ottomans, because of the strait, which is basically similar situation for countries like Denmark or Japan. Because of the straits, you can freely pass them even when there's an enemy navy in the sea, if you control both of those provinces. So if an enemy were to capture one of those provinces and have a naval superiority, they would be able to lock you in either Europe or Asia just by capturing one province. So I think ideally you would put another fort on the other side of the coast. In case of Ottomans, it's not really that relevant because you will take Constantinople anyways, most likely, and you have already fort over here and here, so you should be fine. in this place, but you don't really care that much if it's grasslands. Ideally, of course, it shouldn't be, but you care more about just controlling this one single province than taking battles, because this flank is going to be protected by your other forts in the area. And how would you plant the forts over here? There are no mountains, so we're fine with just planting forts on hills. We already have one over here. There's this one here in Sugla that's not really protecting anything, so you might consider destroying the fort, but honestly I think that you can't have really too much forts unless I guess you plant them in every province. Forts are extremely worth their cost, even though you're paying for them every month, as you can see when they're maintained. But the power to force defensive battles is so important. It's way better to have too many forts than too few. So in this example, you could plant another fort over here and maybe over here, even though in this situation it might not really be worth it because you will be expanding in early game as Ottomans a lot, so you might as well just wait until you conquer some provinces and then set up your defensive perimeter. So let's check another example. For example, I prepared a bit more lands as Ethiopia conquered. Well, actually didn't load the save. So let's say we're Ethiopia, we have expanded fairly well. So let's see, the Great Ado. Just all of the miners around us. Okay, so let's say this is our current situation. Just tick to have the fog of war go. And again, we look at the simple terrain map mode. We have to be careful about the uncolonized provinces, because enemy will still be able to pass through them and go around our fort, so it's not enough to plant one fort, for example, in those highlands. But we have mountains here, so just we just plant one fort here. It's going to defend this province, and then we look for some mountains, for example, here. And also it will give us another bonus of zone of control of almost the entire Horn of Africa, which is pretty nice as well. When you go north, for the sake of the example, let's just integrate Dongola as well. So here you can see we have a nice highlands over here, but all of those provinces are not really protected. So now we can set up a fort using only the rivers. So for example, if we put a fort over here, the enemy could, and also had a fort over here as well, the enemy could only access this Shendi province only from those three. Which means that he wouldn't be able to go around the river, which would give us in a lot of the situations a penalty for the enemy on the crossing, which is of course what we want to achieve. There are some very nice provinces in the world, for example this one. As you can see, it's a very nice, even though it has plains terrain, it has rivers all around the province, which means that from every province you go, there's a river, which is very good for the defender and is exactly what you want. This one province can defend this entire coastal region just by placing one fort. Okay, let's go to the third example, which is Karakulu. And in this example, let's say that we have an ally in Mamluks, let's say, and Ottomans. So in theory, we would be mostly worried about the threat from the Timurids, but I think putting your back empty is a very bad mistake, because even though when an alliance is broken you get 5 years of truce, it can be broken, and it will be if you have no forts on the border with your traitorous ally. So I think you should always try to have forts on border with every country that's played by a player, because you can never be sure that they're not going to just invade you at some point. So when we look at QQ, there's a lot of mountains in this region, and mountain forts are basically the best thing in the game. You want as many of them as possible. So for example, this gives the QQ player something of a target for his expansion. So he wants to secure his border with Timis. He might not want to have any beef with Timis, but Timis might at some point have a beef with him. Something he wants to protect himself, and to do it he wants to have modern forts because that's the best protection you can have. And there's basically 3 spaces that Timurids can go to QQ, and that's through south, through the center, and through the north. For the north we have a fort over here, but it's protecting us right now, but if we were to expand to the north it would be a bit of a problem, because it would only stop the Timurids' aggression to the south, because they could still go along the coast. So ideally we would want to conquer Ardabil and build a fort over there, giving us nice protection on those 3 provinces. In the south we can put a fort over here to block all the access easily. And then in the even more south, any of those provinces would do to protect QQ from the Timurids. Of course, putting additional forts is not bad. It's always nice to have some additional lines of defense, especially in late game, since that's when the assaulting of forts will get popular. So when the war starts you might lose your first line of defense almost immediately, and then the second line of defense becomes really useful. Now the western border of QQ is much more problematic, because in the north you have some mountains, so that's completely fine. At the start of the game I think, yeah, QQ has very nice 2 forts in the north, basically protecting the whole of the north with just 2 mountain forts. But in the south you have this one province, fort in Mosul, which isn't really protecting anything, because for example Mamluks could just go through the south and capture all of your rich Iraq provinces. So we should think about moving this fort somewhere. For example, we could move it from Mosul to Arbil, giving us a -1 dice roll for attacker, which is already pretty nice. And then another one in Baghdad, which is just like the province in Africa, having a river on all of its borders, which gives us a nice bonus. You could also consider just giving up all of this and just build forts on the hills. But as I said, giving up too many provinces is a problem, because you just become too weak to actually continue just staying behind those forts. Also, you might lose too much war score, but if your enemy isn't capturing any forts, it might be actually difficult to gather over 50% war score. So anyway, the point is, build forts, build many of them, and don't care about the cost as long as you're not going bankrupt from them, because forts are really, really valuable. And also build them on all of your borders. Basically, always when you have a player nation next to you, have some kind of plan of how to defend yourself, even if it's your best ally, because you never know. Maybe even that it's just that they might get conquered, and then you will need to have a defensive line against their country, at least where it used to be. Now let's say the war actually starts. Let's go back to the Ottomans. So first thing at least I would do is put the edict and defensive edict. It gives you plus 33% local defensiveness, which basically means that each time a siege is ticking, it's going to take 33% more days, which is pretty nice. The thing that it helps with, it gives you some more time, because if you get attacked, it would be probably mostly a surprise for you. So you will have a bit more time to think about what you want to do, recruit the mercenaries, recruit units, move them from one end of your country to the other. So it just gives you a bit more time, pretty nice. Since I'm talking about edicts already, another nice edict during a tough war is the local manpower modifier one. It's nice to pop in some of your richest states to just get a bit more manpower for the war, but it's not that necessary. Depending on how rich the provinces are, it might not even be that worth it, but it's nice to have a bit more manpower. So now that you have your defensive line with forts, in the Ottoman's case, for example, over here, you have your garrison orders, so you have a bit more time, and now you need to actually think how you want to fight this war. So let's say you're being attacked by a much bigger enemy. Of course, at the start of the game, it's not really going to happen in this setup as Ottomans, but let's say it's 100 years into the game and your enemy is much stronger than you. You're put in a defensive position already, and you have to fight them. Now, some players, what they do is immediately surrender to in wars they know they can't win, which is one way to do it, but I think it's not really the best idea, because it doesn't change the state of the board, which means that instantly you become permanently weaker and they become permanently stronger. So all of their allies don't really use a good partner for themselves, and the enemy of your enemy is also not going to care, because well, he's not going to help you because he just got stronger, so, and you got weaker. So it doesn't set you up for the future, just giving up. Meanwhile, if you actually fight in the war, you become more devastated, of course, by the war, because you're probably going to lose it still. But at least temporarily, your enemy also becomes weaker, and actually during the war, he also becomes a bit invested in your lands, so he cannot have armies on all of his borders when he's fighting you at the same time. So it gives opportunity to his enemies and also makes him a less attractive ally for his allies, which means that potentially the diplomatic situation with your enemy might change. So what I mean is, even if you know you won't be winning the war, you want to at least deal as much damage to your enemy so that it becomes a bad deal for him. So he's paying more than he's gaining, at least in the short term. And potentially this will cause the change of the situation, which will turn it to your advantage. Because if you just give up, you give your provinces, you lose power, they gain power, and it's just there's no reason for the diplomatic situation to really change. People are not really that big into giving all their power to fight someone who's growing. The players don't really want to coalition other players like AIs do, at least not often in my experience. So basically, if we want to deal as much damage, we need to think about, do we want to bankrupt during a war, or do we don't want to bankrupt? And I think it's a difficult question, because of course you can deal more damage if you don't care about your money. If you just take all your loans, recruit all the mercs and manpower units you can, then of course you're in a better position to win some defensive battles, deal more damage. But in this also, bankruptcy can weaken your nation a lot more than just a lost war. So I think that if you are already behind on technology ideas, then maybe bankrupting is not the best idea, because you're going to get even more behind. And at a certain point, once you're certain amounts of ideas and text behind, it's very difficult to come back from that, unless you are in a safe position. But since you're getting invaded by a stronger power, then you're not really in a safe position anyways. So that's technology, ideas, one thing to consider. Also, how stronger your enemy is than you. If your enemy is way stronger, that you bankrupting yourself to fight him wouldn't cause him to bankrupt, and he would still be able to easily win, then I don't think it's viable to go bankrupt during this war. You still can't, because another thing is that when you lose 100%, you're going to get 15 years truce, one way or the other. But the longer you fight, the more additional time you get, and there's a possibility of the diplo situation changing somewhere else. So if you fight for 10 years, you get 25 years, which is quite a long time in the game. It's basically about 3-4 hours on speed 2, which means basically one session. So sometimes it might be worth it. As I said, it's very difficult to say. But when you go bankrupt, several things to consider is that if you are giving up land, or if your enemy is pushing you from the forts and you're losing provinces, it's good to just take all the loans possible immediately, just like this. Because now you don't care about your loan ceiling, because at the moment Ottomans can take 49 loans. If they lost half of the country, they will only have like 30 available, which means they're missing out on 20 loans they could have potentially taken if they started taking the loans beforehand. So it's if you're losing a lot of land, it's sometimes worth it to just take all of it immediately. And if you're already at the war that you're going to lose and you've decided to go bankrupt, it's sometimes worth it to start immediately building some buildings, manufactories or workshops, because after bankrupting, all the buildings you built in the previous 5 years are being destroyed. But if you build them, for example, 6 years before, from the money you're going to take from the loans, then it's fine. So building them at the start of the war might give you a bit of a stronger start after the bankruptcy. So we're fighting a war against a stronger enemy, and we've decided to go bankrupt, let's say. So just a simple checklist. I go through basically all the tabs in this menu and check out if I have an advisor, discipline or morale, preferably just for battles. And at this point I don't really care about his level, because I'm going bankrupt anyways. So I guess I will get some more military power, which is also nice. But with all the loans money, I don't really care about losing a bit more. So let's say +2 discipline. Taking a +3 on poor nations might not be the best idea, because it's really a lot more money. But if you're rich enough, you probably have +3 already, so that doesn't really change much. There's nothing here, nothing here. Tech. Another thing that's very important is if you're behind on tech and your enemy is attacking you, which maybe they just took the tech very fast, so they're using this kind of window of opportunity to attack you, it's very worth it to just give up some forts and only fight after you yourself gain the military tech. Similar thing with ideas. Then missions. It's good to know what missions you have, because for example this is a generic mission to build to force limit, very easy to fulfill, but do not take it too early because it gives you +5 to morale, which in certain battles can give you the edge you need to actually keep your fort and defend yourself. It's for 25 years, so it will be enough for the entire war, but if you take it beforehand, then you're just going to miss it. Then policies, of course, take all the policies you can. And religion, becoming a defender of faith, gives you another +5 morale. And this plus the mission is +10, which is basically like getting a good morale idea, which is pretty nice. Of course, different religions have also different modifiers, so make sure to check that. And that's that. If you're playing on 1.28, then getting military power from your estates is also nice. You could also go for the monthly military power over here. Okay, so our army has as high quality as we possibly could have at the moment. So how much should we have? Basically, if you're going bankrupt, then you probably should go over the force limit. It kind of depends on the situation, of course, how many enemy troops are there. If it doesn't matter if you go 200% over force limit, then of course you shouldn't, because you're not going to be able to, for example, at this point maintain 100k regiments, at least for a long time enough to defend yourself. But definitely going over the force limit is very much okay in player war. Even if you're not going bankrupt, then taking a few loans just to recruit a bit more mercenaries, a bit more manpower troops, I think it's a good idea. And remember, as at the very beginning of the game, Ottomans can take 8k ducats in loans instantly. So spending like 1,000 to gain enough forces to defend yourself and keep a bunch of provinces in your empire, I think it's very much worth it. So another thing that's left is, how do you bankrupt once we're in this position? And as you can see, if we for a period of 5 years get a debuff, it will increase the interest per annum, which basically means that loans during the bankruptcy are more expensive. We get a hit to morale, which makes our armies basically useless against other players, which means that bankrupting during a war is very bad for you. Advisor cost +50%. It doesn't really matter that much, especially for 5 years. You can just, if you're really poor, you can just not take advisors, but for level 1 advisors it doesn't really matter. Technology costs +50%, so you're not going to be taking technology, same ideas. Your colonies will take a hit. All centers will be downgraded, which is quite annoying, but you will also lose free prestige, all of your prestige and free stability. So what we want to do is, before going bankrupt, get to give me a moment, go to free stability, which will mean that after going bankrupt we will still have 0 stability, which will be very nice for us, because if our nation was relatively stable, this will prevent any rebels from coming up, which would be difficult to deal with since we have a moral deficit, as well as the manpower doesn't recover as fast during a bankruptcy. Of course, the best way to deal with bankruptcy is to have some good allies to help you with rebels, but you can't always count for that, so it's best to prevent them. Don't be afraid to recruit a few mercenaries and take a few loans during a bankruptcy, because yes, it's more expensive, but losing provinces to rebels is much worse than losing some money. So that's basically it. What I want to say is that forts, extremely important. Don't be afraid to take loans. Don't be afraid to go over the force limit. Take defensive battles as much as you can, because if enemy has any kind of advantage, you always must fight on the better terrain to even have a hope of winning any battles. So I think that would be more or less all from me. Thank you for watching.